Adapted from archaic translation by Robert Chalmers. Jataka number 151. Sañjīva-Jātaka. Befriend a villain. This story was told by the master when at the bamboo grove, about King Ajatashatru's adherence to false teachers. For he believed in that hostile rival of the Buddhas, the lowly and wicked Devadatta, and in his infatuation, wishing to do honor to Devadatta, expended a vast sum in erecting a monastery at Gayasisa. And following Devadatta's wicked advices, he killed the good and virtuous old king his father, who had entered on the paths, by that destroying his own chance of winning like goodness and virtue, and bringing great suffering upon himself. Hearing that the earth had swallowed up Devadatta, he feared a like fate for himself. And such was the frenzy of his terror that he looked after not of his kingdom's welfare, slept not upon his bed, but ranged abroad quaking in every limb, like a young elephant in an agony of pain. In fancy he saw the earth yawning for him, and the flames of hell darting on. He could see himself fastened down on a bed of burning metal with iron lances being thrust into his body. Like a wounded cock, not for one instant was he at peace. The desire came on him to see the all-knowing Buddha, to be reconciled to him, and to ask guidance of him. But because of the magnitude of his transgressions he withdrew from coming into the Buddha's presence. When the Khuddaka festival came round, and by night Rajgraha city was illuminated and decorated like a city of the gods, the king, as he sat on high upon a throne of gold, saw Jataka Komaravaka sitting near. The idea flashed across his mind to go with Jataka to the Buddha, but he felt he could not say outright that he would not go alone, but wanted Jataka to take him. No. The better course would be, after praising the beauty of the night, to propose sitting at the feet of some sage or Brahmin, and to ask the courtiers what teacher can give the heart peace. Of course, they would rigorously praise their own masters. But Jataka would be sure to praise the all-enlightened Buddha. And to the Buddha the king with Jataka would go. So he burst into 5 times praises of the night, saying, "How fair, sirs, is this clear cloudless night! How beautiful! How charming! How delightful! How lovely! What sage or Brahmin shall we seek out, to see if by chance he may give our hearts peace?" Then one minister recommended Purana Kashyapa, another Makali Gosala, and others again Ajita Kesakambala, Khuddaka Nikàya, Sañjīva-Jātaka, or Nagantha Nataputta. All these names the king heard in silence, waiting for his chief minister, Jataka, to speak. But Jataka, suspecting that the king's real object was to make him speak, kept silence in order to make sure. At last the king said, "Well, my good Jataka, why have you nothing to say?" At the word Jataka arose from his seat, and with hands clasped in adoration towards the Lord Buddha, cried, "Sire, over there in my mango grove dwells the all-enlightened Buddha with 1350 brethren. This is the high fame that has arisen concerning him." And here he proceeded to recite the 9 titles of honor ascribed to him, beginning with Venerable. When he had further shown how from his birth onwards, the Buddha's powers had surpassed all the earlier predictions and expectations, Jataka said, "Unto him, the Lord Buddha, let the king go, to hear the truth and to put questions." His object thus attained. The king asked Jataka to have the elephants got ready and went in royal state to Jataka's mango grove, where he found in the perfumed pavilion the Buddha amid the brotherhood which was tranquil as the ocean in perfect rest. Look where he would, the king's eye saw only the endless ranks of the brethren, exceeding in numbers any following he had ever seen. Pleased with the behavior of the brethren, the king bowed low and spoke words of praise. Then, saluting the Buddha, he seated himself, and asked him the question, "What is the fruit of the religious life?" And the Lord Buddha gave utterance to the Samanaphala Sutta in 2 sections. Glad at heart, the king made his peace with the Buddha at the close of the sutta, and rising up departed with due reverence. Soon after the king had gone, the master addressed the brethren and said, "Brethren, this king is uprooted. Had not this king killed in lust for dominion that righteous ruler his father was, he would have won the Arhat's clear vision of the truth, before he rose from his seat. But for his sinful favoring of Devadatta he has missed the fruit of the first path." Next day the brethren talked together of all this and said that Ajatashatru's crime of father-killing, which was due to that wicked and sinful Devadatta, whom he had favored, had lost him salvation. And that Devadatta had been the king's ruin. At this point the master entered the hall of truth and asked the subject of their talk. Being told, the master said, "This is not the first time, brethren, that Ajatashatru has suffered for favoring the sinful. Like conduct in the past cost him his life." So saying, he told this story of the past. Once upon a time when Brahmadatta was reigning in Benares, the Bodhisattva was born into the family of a wealthy Brahmin. Arriving at years of discretion, he went to study at Taxila, where he received a complete education. In Benares as a teacher he enjoyed worldwide fame and had 500 young Brahmins as pupils. Among these was one named Sañjīva, to whom the Bodhisattva taught the spell for raising the dead to life. But though the young man was taught this, he was not taught the counter-charm. Proud of his new power, he went with his fellow pupils to the forest wood gathering, and there came on a dead tiger. "Now see me bring the tiger to life again," said he. "You can't," said they. "You look and you will see me do it." "Well, if you can, do so," said they, and climbed up a tree then. Then Sañjīva repeated his charm and struck the dead tiger with a broken pottery. Up started the tiger and quick as lightning sprang at Sañjīva and bit him on the throat, killing him outright. Dead fell the tiger then and there, and dead fell Sañjīva too at the same spot. So there the two lay dead side by side. The young Brahmins took their wood and went back to their master, to whom they told the story. "My dear pupils," said he, "know in this regard how by reason of showing favor to the sinful and paying honor where it was not due, he has brought all this calamity upon himself." And so saying he uttered this stanza. Befriend a villain, aid him in his need. And, like that tiger which Sañjīva raised to life, he straight devours you for your pains. Such was the Bodhisattva's lesson to the young Brahmins, and after a life of almsgiving and other good deeds he passed away to fare according to his deeds. His lesson ended, the master identified the birth by saying, "Ajatashatru was the young Brahmin of those days who brought the dead tiger to life, and I the world-famed teacher." Source: adapted from archaic translation by W. H. D. Rouse. Jataka number 152. Rajavada Jataka. Rough to the rough, etc. This story the master told while he was living in Jetavana monastery, to explain how a king was taught a lesson. This will be set on in the Tesakuna birth. It is said that one day the king of Kosala had just passed sentence in a very difficult case involving moral wrong. After his meal, with hands not yet dry, he proceeded in his splendid chariot to visit the master. And the king saluted him, his feet beautiful like the open lotus flower, and sat down aside. Then the master addressed him in these words: "Why, my lord king, what brings you here at this time of day?" "Sir," said he, "I missed my time because I was sitting on a difficult case, involving moral wrong. Now I have finished it, and eaten, and here I am, with my hands hardly dry, to wait upon you." "My lord king," replied the master, "to judge a cause with justice and impartiality is the right thing. That is the way to heaven. Now when you first have the advice of a being all-wise like me, it is no wonder if you should judge your case fairly and justly. But the wonder is when kings have only had the advice of scholars who are not all-wise, and yet have decided fairly and justly, avoiding the 4 ways of wickedness, and observing the 10 royal virtues, and after ruling justly have gone to the heaven." Then, at the king's request, he told a story of the olden time. Once upon a time, when Brahmadatta was king of Benares, the Bodhisattva was conceived by his queen-wife. And the ceremonies proper to her state having been duly done, she was afterwards safely delivered. On his name day, the name they gave him was Prince Brahmadatta. In course of time, he grew up, and at 16 years went to Taxila for his education, where he mastered all branches of learning. And on his father's death he became king in his stead, and ruled with uprightness and all correctness, administering justice with no regard had to his own will or whim. And as he ruled thus justly, his ministers on their part were also just. Thus, while all things were justly done, there was none who brought a false suit into court. Presently all the activity of suitors ceased within the premises of the palace. All day long the ministers might sit on the bench, and go away without seeing a single suitor. The courts were deserted. Then the Bodhisattva thought to himself, "Because of my just government not one suitor comes to try issue in court. The old hubbub is quiet. The courts of law are deserted. Now I must search whether I have any fault in me, which if I find, I will avoid it, and live a good life hereafter." From that time he tried continually to find someone who would tell him of a fault. But of all who were about him at court he could not find one such. Nothing could he hear but good of himself. "Perhaps," thought he, "they are all so much afraid of me that they say no ill of me but only good." And so he went about to try those who were outside his walls. But with these it was just the same. Then he made inquisition of the citizens at large, and outside the city questioned those who belonged to the suburbs at the 4 city gates. Still there was none who had any fault to find. Nothing but praises could he hear. Lastly, with intent to try the countryside, he entrusted all government to his ministers, and mounted in his carriage, and taking only the driver with him, left the city in disguise. All the country he moved across, even to the frontier. But not a fault-finder could he light upon. All he could hear was only his own praises. So back he turned from the marches, and set his face homewards again by the highroad. Now it happened that at this very time Mallika, the king of Kosala, had done the very same thing. He too was a just king, and he had been searching for his faults. But amongst those about him, there was none who had any fault to find. And hearing nothing but praise, he had been making inquiry throughout all the country, and had but then arrived at that same spot. These two met, in a place where the carriage road was deeply sunk between 2 banks, and there was no room for one carriage to pass another. "Get your carriage out of the way," said King Mallika's driver to the driver of the king of Benares. "No, no, driver," said he, "out of the way with yours. Know that in this carriage sits the great monarch Brahmadatta, lord of the kingdom of Benares." "Not so, driver," replied the other, "in this carriage sits the great King Mallika, lord of the realm of Kosala." It is for you to make way, and to give place to the carriage of our king." "Why, here's a king too," thought the driver of the king of Benares. "What in the world is to be done?" Then a thought struck him. He would inquire what should be the age of the two kings, so that the younger should give way to the elder. And he made inquiry of the other driver how old his king was. But he learnt that both were of the same age. Upon that he asked the extent of this king's power, wealth, and glory, and all points touching his caste and clan and his family. Discovering that both of them had a country 300 leagues long, and that they were alike in power, wealth, glory, and the nature of their family and lineage. Then he thought that place might be given to the better man. So he requested that the other driver should describe his master's virtues. The man replied by the first verse of poetry following, in which he set on his monarch's faults as though they were so many virtues. Rough to the rough, King Mallika the mild with mildness sways. Masters the good by goodness, and the bad with badness pays. Give place, O driver. Such are this monarch's ways. "Oh," said the man of the king of Benares, "is that all you have to say about your king's virtues?" "Yes," said the other. "If these are his virtues, what must his vices be?" "Vices be it, then," said he, "if you will. But let us hear what your king's virtues may be like." "Listen then," replied the first, and repeated the second verse. He conquers anger by mildness, the bad with goodness sways. By gifts the miser overcomes and lies with truth repays. Give place, O driver. Such are this monarch's ways." At these words both King Mallika and his driver descended from their carriage, and untied the horses, and moved it out of the way, to give place to the king of Benares. Then the king of Benares gave good advice to King Mallika, saying, "Thus and thus must you do." After which he returned to Benares, and there gave alms and did good all his life, till at the last the went to the heaven. And King Mallika took the lesson to heart. And after traversing the length and breadth of the land, and lighting upon none who had any fault to find, returned to his own city, where he gave alms all his life and did good, till at the end he too went to the heaven. When the master had ended this discourse, which he began for the purpose of giving a lesson to the king of Kosala, he identified the birth. Moggallana was then the driver of King Mallika, Ananda was the king, Saraputra was the driver of the king of Benares, but I myself was the king.